All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Hart Hustle Podcast. I am incredibly excited to have my man, Abraham Skulley, with me today. I discovered Abraham via LinkedIn, I believe, right? We kind of
Yeah,
connected on that channel, was really interested in everything that you're doing from a mental health perspective, but also kind of like your family history and the mission that you're on to spread awareness around mental health. So I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the show, man. It's going to be an absolute blast chatting with you today.
absolutely, bro. I'm excited. Thanks for the opportunity, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. So let's get started. So let's break down your background a little bit. So why don't you let everybody know where Abraham came from, what type of household he grew up in, and kind of some of your early life experiences. Let's give everybody a little bit of a background.
For sure. How far do you want to go?
Take it back to the very beginning, man. Let's talk about like Abraham and diapers. Where were you at?
Oh man, I love it. So, young Abe. I'll start there. Young Abe, family, closest friends call me Abe. I grew up in a very fun, active household. I grew up in Miami, Florida. All the Floridians listening to this. And it was a really amazing experience just having three other siblings, being the middle child, kind of sorta, and being the one who would always be interested in, how can I know my brothers and sisters? So it was I was that kid, and we did anything from arguing about playing Super Nintendo, NBA Fever, all these different, games
Okay.
to climbing mango trees in the backyard, playing WWE wrestling on each other. It was a fun experience. And what was very interesting about it is both my parents are from Jamaica. So they moved to the United States because they thought there were many opportunities that they couldn't have access to in Jamaica. They also wanted to start a family. My dad is an entrepreneur, in and out. Like I've seen my dad start businesses, hire employees, and not even be like documented, right?
Yeah.
Not even have, papers at that time, but yet he's running these businesses and hiring, citizens. So it was really cool to watch that and just see their hustle as a couple. And so I grew up in that type of environment. I also grew up in a Christian family. So my dad's a pastor, right? And so I had an opportunity to be exposed to faith, religion, relationship with God at a very early age. By the time I was like 11 years old, I could recite all 66 books of the Bible,
Oh,
like
wow.
without even looking. Like it was that, it was that deep.
Wow.
Yeah, we were the type of family that we were the ones who opened the church doors for everyone else to come in. So it was very, very interesting, fun, unique household. One thing that I always talk about in my household is that although we had so many conversations about so many different things, unfortunately, we didn't talk about mental health.
Mm.
So when I was 14 years old, my parents, after being married for over 20 years, they decided to divorce. And that was something that I never imagined would happen and had no idea what the effects of that would be. And I didn't even recognize the effects until much later. But long story short, they divorced and our family, our beautiful family, broke apart. So we went from everyone being in one household to my dad being here, my mom being here, my siblings being here, me being here, and bouncing between different households and trying to figure it out. Like as a young person, what does it mean to no longer have your family as one unit? So that led to me being very rebellious. I went from being a straight A student, although I gave a lot of trouble in the
Hmm.
household. I did show up when it came to my academics. Straight A student. By the time I was in middle school, I already had a 4-year scholarship to any college I wanted to go to in Florida. Like
Hold
that
on.
type of
So
student.
how does this happen? So you're just killing it throughout school. You're
hmm
getting such good grades that literally they're like, you can come wherever you want in our home state of Florida. I've never heard
Yeah,
of that before. You must have been really top tier, man.
top tier. I'm talking about academically and just behavior. So like, how I showed up in the classroom, the type of individual I was very much, hey, let's look up to Abraham. Like the younger students and even my peers like saw me as a mentor. But there was this specific program called Take Stock in Children. And so it was this mentorship program, a scholarship program that for students who qualified, they were able to work with the program up until they graduated from high school. And if they can stay consistent with the program, they now have, the funds, a scholarship to attend any college in Florida. I don't know if the program still exists. It may still exist, but I was a part of that. And so I went from being that type of student to like the complete opposite. When my parents broke up, it was like all hell broke loose. I didn't know how to articulate the pain that I was feeling emotionally. We didn't have conversations as a family as to like what happens next. It was almost like, okay, yes, we're going through this. And although we're kind of acting like we're not going through this and it's not bothering us, we're also not going to talk about it. You kind of just have to figure it out. So at 14 years old, I'm trying to figure out what the heck is going on and how do I move on and how do I get all of these emotions inside of me out. And the best way I knew to do that at 14 was just acting out. So I'm talking about anything from hanging with the wrong crowd, smoking, drinking, acting out of character. But as I got older, I realized everything that I was doing, was simply the effect and a display of me articulating what was going on internally. I just didn't have the language for it. So fast forward to high school, went to high school, those same behaviors carried over all the way up until 11th grade, until I had a mentor of mine, Joe, my guy Joe. He encouraged me to go to college, and I had no intentions of going to college, but he encouraged me to fill out some applications and just see what happens. I ended up getting accepted to a couple, and that shifted my mindset in terms of, hey, I don't want to just graduate from high school and continue working at Wendy's. And there's nothing wrong with working at Wendy's, but I want to actually see what's out there. So I ended up going to college. I moved 700 miles away from home. And I'm now this first, generation college student. No one in my family had done it. I was the first to try it out, and I was excited. And that first year, as exciting as it was, there were also some challenges that I did not anticipate. And one of those challenges were, it was struggling with my mental health. And I had no language again for mental health or things like depression. But I had a good friend of mine who saw the shift happen. She saw me shift from being this very enthusiastic go-getter to not seeing me on campus, not really engaging, not answering her phone calls or text messages. And she was brave enough to reach out. She reached out to me one weekend and asked me, hey, this is what I'm noticing. Is everything okay? I lied and said everything is okay. And I tried dancing around the issue until I couldn't. And she was that type of friend that was very persistent. And in that conversation, she introduced me to the counseling center on campus, which is where I was able to finally sit down with a mental health professional for the first time in my life, was diagnosed with major depressive disorder, treated for major depressive disorder. And that really, kick-started me on this journey of what the heck is mental health? What the heck is depression? How did I get so low? And how do I put myself in position to not look at depression as this thing that happens to those people, but look at the importance of prioritizing my own mental health and well-being, but also be in a position to share my story so that other people who look like me, right, who come from similar backgrounds or experiences, they know that, they can also do the work required to prioritize them and be in a healthy state of mind.
I think that's an amazing story. You've been through so much and so much lived experience that so many people can relate to who are listening to this episode. One of the things that I think about in society today is the rate in which kind of these superheroes of our parents and their relationships we put up on a pedestal. right? But so many people have gone through the experience of seeing their parents have rocky times. They end up separating, they end up getting divorced. It's a more common story than not. And I don't think we give ourselves enough credit to recognize the internal impacts on kind of our younger versions of self. Because when our parents split up, it's like, wait, hold on. This was something that no one ever told me was going to happen. You know what I mean? And like seeing the fact that we want attention, that we want to be able to talk about these things. And then your family took the same stance that pretty much everybody's family does. It's like, let's just keep moving forward. So when you were in those early days and you're with your siblings, did you guys ever kind of have the conversations internally about like what's going on with mom and dad? Or did you guys just keep it pushing as well?
No, and one thing I like to share is that more is caught than taught. So a lot of what my parents said, we don't really listen to those things, but we do what we see them do. Yeah. And because it was they're moving forward, they're acting as if nothing is happening. It was almost like we just tagged along and, gave those same, took those same steps. But one thing I want to mention to what you just said, because I think it's critical, is like, not only do we recognize that there's a lot happening when our parents break up, or for those who experience that, but it's also, as a young person, it's hard to understand that this has nothing to do with you. This is literally two human beings going through issues, and they're unable to work through their issues, and so they are separating. It has nothing to do with who you are as a child. It has nothing to do with the behaviors that you've displayed. It has nothing to do with what you did or did not do. And I think many children, especially at young ages, they blame themselves. Like, the reason my parents divorced is because I wasn't, good enough, or I did something. But it has nothing, like literally, it had nothing to do with me. And it wasn't until I got older where I started to really separate myself from the situation and look at it from an objective standpoint, especially now being a married person. I'm 3 years in the game. Like, I can clearly see how somebody can make a decision to divorce, because marriage is hard. And if you don't have the skills, the tools, the community, the support, like, it's easy to say, forget this, I'm done. So now I look at it from a whole new perspective of, they were just two human beings. First of all, they came from Jamaica. They're now in this whole new place. They're trying to figure it out. They have this family. They have bills to pay. Like, they have things going on, and they come up on some marital issues that they need to work through. So understanding it from that lens, I think for a lot of people who experience or come from homes like this, it helps the individual who does have that hurt to know that this has nothing to do with me, and I can actually support in this process by showing compassion, having grace for the situation. Because one of the things that I did for a very long time is I harbored a lot of like resentment and hurt and pain because I thought this was being done to me. So I just wanted to share that point too.
I think that's incredibly important to bring up, because you're 100% right. When we come from a younger mindset, we always think that we have a bigger impact on the people around us than often we do, especially with our parents. And so I remember, I think I was like 23 years old, maybe 22, the first time I kind of had one of those aha moments where I was like, wait, these people aren't superheroes. They're human just like I am, and they're trying to figure stuff out. And it kind of like gives you that, if everybody who grew up in like the early 2000s, gives you like that's so Raven moment where it's like you kind of like recognize everything that's going on.
I love that show.
When did you have that moment? Was it before or once you went away to college? Like, do you remember the time you had that epiphany of like, damn, Mike, my parents are just real people?
I had many of those, bro. The most recent one was probably last month. Yeah. But I think the more I grow and mature, the more I have those moments. And I don't see it as a bad thing. I see it as, well, dang, bro, you're doing the work to grow as a human being. And so now your brain is expanding, which allows you to see things differently. I would say one of the moments that helped me to see it in that way is I was watching a movie, and I'll never forget this day. Like, I want to say, were me and my wife dating? I think me and my wife were dating at the time. We weren't married yet. And we went to go see this movie. And in the movie, there was a scene where it was like a father-son scene. And I don't know what the heck happened in terms of who hit the tear jerker switch, but the actor says something, or there was something this director did, and out of nowhere I started bawling in the movie theater, like uncontrollably. And my girlfriend at the time, maybe fiance, she's like, putting my head on her shoulder, like, it's okay. But she has no idea why I'm crying. And I didn't even know what it was that triggered me to, have all of those emotions. But essentially what happened is I realized from watching that scene that there were certain things that I wished I had received from my dad that didn't happen as a result of the divorce and the kind of that separation. And then through that realization, it helped me to see, wow, right? This couldn't happen because my dad was going through things in this moment. So it's that realization of I'm not like the center of the world, although I felt that way, like, as a kid, is like I'm the center of attention. All things revolve around me. It's like, no, there are so many moving pieces like that play a role and that factor into what's going on in my life as a whole.
I mean, it's just some of those early moments are so powerful. And one of the things that I like to talk about, especially being men who come from African American, Jamaican descent, we have to recognize that we have a responsibility to be the best versions of our male lineage. And I say that to say our grandparents, our great-grandparents grew up in completely different worlds than we did. And that meant they didn't often have the skill sets, nor the time or the space to be able to recognize how they should have emotional conversations, how people need to be supported with empathy, how you need to be able to support your children. Like my great-grandfather was a sharecropper from Arkansas. My grandfather was born in 1930 in America at that point in time, and it's pretty easy to say how discriminatory it was at that point in time. My father had the ability to kind of put his family first by being an entrepreneur and making bigger gambles and taking a chance on himself. Now, when it comes to having conversations like we're having today, Abe, I just think about the skills and the opportunities that you and I have that the people in our family, our fathers specifically, didn't even have the awareness to be able to recognize as being as important as they are. And now that we are here having conversations like this, I think we're doing a great job of taking that baton and moving it forward to be able to recognize kind of how important this stuff is. And part of my conversation today really is going to be about just the element of being a man in today's world, especially an African-American man who really has an emphasis on mental health. Those things are so important, but those conversations are incredibly scary. And we're really the first generation who is having them publicly in a fashion like this. And so, I just want to commend you for everything that you've done thus far. And I just kind of think about the next 5-10 years of your life and how many conversations you're really going to start for other people. So
let me say, can I share something to that point?
Yeah, man.
Because you are absolutely right. And I think that perspective has helped me in my journey and growth and development to see that as the generations have progressed, we have just been getting better in different ways. It's not that we're stagnant. It's not that we're going backwards, but because of what my great grandpa did, my grandpa was able to do this. Because of what my grandpa did, my dad was able to do this. And it just goes on. And that perspective is like, dang, I'm only here because of them. Not like we're in two different things. It's like we work together. This is a collaborative effort. And I love the analogy about passing the baton. But I also want to shout out all the men, especially African-American men who are from that generation before us, who are also doing that emotional work. Because I'm a part of communities, and I try to always keep myself like surrounded by people who are at different levels, higher levels than me, and like growing, because I value growth. And there are, 50-year-olds, 60-year-olds, 70-year-olds that I get to meet and be in relationship with who are seeing what our generation is doing, and they are fighting whatever internal barriers they need to fight in order to level up for themselves and have these emotional conversations. And so I do want to, hold space to shout them out and congratulate them, because I can only imagine like the amount of effort and energy it takes to come from that earlier generation, but then also be open to what's happening now, the shifts that are happening now. Because who our great grandparents were and grandparents were, they had to be that because of the situation that they were in. Like, we're talking about vulnerability now, but just imagine, you have a slave owner and you are practicing vulnerability, right? You will be manipulated, at the highest level, like you'll be taken advantage of. So to not be vulnerable during that time was necessary in many cases. So because we have evolved as a culture, we've evolved as a people, and we are now adapting to this new opportunity, really. Like, it takes work for them to come from that mindset and also be open to the work that it takes to get to that next level. So, and thank you for the kudos and the work that I've been able to do. And my goal really is to continue these conversations, but essentially, like, how can we eradicate the stigma and shame around mental health? Like, that's my personal, I believe it's like even a calling for me, bro. Like, I feel like, I am very like entrepreneurial and interested in many different things, and some things are related to mental health, some are not. But I feel like this conversation about mental health and what I've been through will always be a part of me, because this was a transformational period of my life that I had no idea would lead to the work that I'm doing these days. But I don't see myself not doing this at any point, because I see younger people, coming up to me after hearing my story and having a conversation with me and seeing me, so open to talking about these things and so vulnerable. And then they start to do the same. And then they're asking themselves, man, how did you make me do that? I don't normally tell people these. And it goes the same way with the older guys. Like, I'll have conversations and do, presentations, whether it's at a church. But I see the older generation hearing someone like me come up and, be vulnerable, and then they start doing the same thing. So it's like, there's no way I can stop doing this, because this only pushes our culture forward. Like, we talk about African-American men. Imagine if we bring the physical strength, the mental fortitude, and all of those things that we already possess, in addition to seeing power and vulnerability. Like, we are literally unstoppable, bro.
Man, that makes me, that's a scary combination. You know what I'm saying?
Oh,
Someone who
man.
is physically strong, who is intelligent, who is entrepreneurial, who's a go-getter, a grinder, who's willing to do the work, but also willing to be vulnerable and have real conversations. I mean, imagine just like the generations of men who will come from people like us. As you were talking there, I started to think about when I was younger, I saw examples of people doing things in my society that caused me to go into my passions. I grew up in Seattle. I watched Ken Griffey Jr. hit home runs on TV, right, playing for the Mariners. And I was like, dude, I want to do that. And now that we've got people like you and me out there who are talking about these vulnerable conversations, the importance of mental health, but more importantly, kind of starting conversations around why this stuff is so important, it doesn't always have to be on the biggest stage, but sometimes the example that we're setting for others is the thing that has the ability to sway how somebody goes into things that they're passionate about. Like when we were coming up, the only examples that I saw of African-American men were playing sports. I'm an entrepreneur today because my father was an entrepreneur. I didn't even know that that was a thing until later, when entrepreneurial lifestyle became more popular, that I recognized, like, oh, this is something that other people do as well. It's like, in order for us to follow in the footsteps of the great men who have done things behind us and in the future, we have to be able to kind of lay those footsteps down first and show people that's a safe space. One of the things I often think about as well is there's a lot of silent observers out there, especially when we're talking about an important subject like mental health. I would imagine that sometimes when you go talk in front of a crowd, there are men in that space who are like, I agree with that. It takes them to a place where they're like, okay, I totally relate with that. I understand where you're coming from. I have those feelings too. But because of that stigma that we still hold internally, often we don't kind of, stand up and show that we are in alignment with that. And that's something that I think people need to recognize today. There's a lot of people listening and a lot of people watching. Maybe because you're not getting a likes, engagement, or people standing up and giving you a round of applause doesn't mean that you're not having an impact. And I think that's a huge part of the work that you do, especially on like a public forum and in a public space. Being able to create an example for people is so powerful, man. And I just kind of, want to give you a little bit more kudos, Abe, for the great work
Thanks.
that you're doing.
I appreciate it, bro. And to that point about like being an example, I'm very grateful for the opportunity that I have with being an example, because I also went to school for psychology and got my bachelor's in psychology. And typically when someone is studying psychology, the route is to be a counselor. Like you do individual counseling, one-on-one counseling, and that's typically the route that you take. Obviously there are other directions if you want to get into sports psychology, occupational psychology, all of those different things, organizational. But our first thought is, if you're studying psychology, after you get done with your bachelor's, you're going to get your master's in counseling, and then you're going to become a therapist. When I started studying psychology, I already knew I would never be a therapist. That was not my goal. And I had the self-awareness enough to know I don't want to do the one-on-one. I want to be able to have the same level of impact on a bigger scale. And when I got introduced to this public speaking world, which I didn't even know was a thing, I didn't know people got paid to speak in front of people. Like my thought was, I want to study psychology so that I am knowledgeable, so that when anyone comes to me in a one-on-one conversation, like I can give them some tips, some strategies on how to either further the conversation or maybe even help themselves. But the speaking thing, that didn't come until much later. But when I was exposed to that, it kind of merged with this entrepreneurial part of me. And I started to really like look at it as this can be a career path. And since doing that, I've been able to speak, campuses all throughout the country. And I meet a lot of psychology students, and they're like, how can I do what you're doing? Mm-hmm. And I'm saying, you're in the right spot. If you're studying psychology, let's say you have a story, you consider yourself an advocate, you want to create change, you want to create impact, like you can do this too. You don't necessarily have to be a therapist, and not pushing anyone from being a therapist, because we absolutely need our clinicians and all of our mental health professionals, and those who are going in that direction, they know that's what they want to do. But then there are some other people who are studying psychology, but they're trying to figure it out. Like, I want to do this, but I'm not sure. And then they see or hear someone like me, presenting, and realize, oh, this person does this as a profession. Like, how the heck can I do that? Right? And so it's now opening up opportunities for younger people to say, maybe I can become a mental health speaker. Maybe I can become a consultant. Maybe I can do all of these different things that I didn't know was possible. I thought I had to be a counselor. So just a quick, just something I wanted to share on that too.
Yeah, I mean, this is a huge part that I think about in the entrepreneurial journey, right? I put a post the other day on LinkedIn, and it was like, entrepreneurs drive society forward because we're willing to take a different perspective at challenges that we face. Now, when I kind of started my entrepreneurial journey back in 2014, we started a telehealth company specifically to increase access to mental health services here in the state of Nevada. And me being younger, I didn't come from a psychology background, right? I didn't come from, a clinical background, and that's something that made me different, but it also gave me different perspectives on the space. And when we talk about approaching a problem, one of the biggest things that we find, or if I found in healthcare, is the model in itself is always going to be trading time for service, right? But it obviously creates bottlenecks if I have to sit down with Abe for 45 minutes and I deliver a 45-minute service to you. There's only so many 45-minute slots in the day, in the week, in the year. And we just, at this point in time, have a bigger swath of people who need the services that we're trying to provide. So how do we attack that differently? And one of the biggest things that you can do, and this is kind of something I admire about you, is you've taken a lot of scary situations nose to nose, right? Going into mental and behavioral health and being a public speaker. Public speaking in itself is one of the scariest things that, people identify in society today. And so do you think that your ability to take on tough challenges is kind of what has primed you to be so confident about speaking about mental health? Because in itself, it's a scary conversation, scary topic, but you're just used to doing scary stuff?
100%, man. And I credit my parents to it. I mean, you think about two Jamaicans who are immigrants and literally are building a family, and they're in this place that they've never been before, and they have to figure it out. Right. I saw a lot of, I'm going to do what it takes to get to where I need to go. I'm going to do those scary stuff. So I mentioned earlier, more is caught than taught. I don't think my parents ever told me, hey, you should get up and go do scary things. But I saw them, be resilient. And that just kind of rubbed off on me. And, what's very interesting is with this whole speaking thing, I was very much afraid of speaking. Because my dad was a pastor, like, he would always throw me up and I would have to do the scripture reading or the offering, and I would hate it, bro. Like, I would be so nervous. And that followed me for years. Like, I remember being in undergrad, and I went to a PWI, predominantly white institution. And at the time, there weren't many black people in my classes. And so I almost felt like inferior. And then I'm also like a first generation student. So I felt like, I don't feel like I'm supposed to be here. I don't feel. Yeah. And so for a very long time, I never raised my hand and I never asked questions, because even though I had questions and I wasn't doing as well as I would have liked to, I was nervous to speak publicly. So what I did for myself is I said, all right, Abe, you're going to have to get over this if you want to be successful. I went from sitting in the back of the class to sitting in the middle. And then I did that for some time, for a few weeks, and I got comfortable sitting in the middle. And then I went from sitting in the middle of the class to sitting in the front of the class. I got comfortable sitting in the front of the class. And then I said, all right, what's the next step? How about I start raising my hand and just saying things out loud? Maybe it might not be a question. It might just be a comment about something the professor said. So I would do that, and I got comfortable raising my hand and speaking in front of people. And then I went to the next stage, which was, okay, I actually have a question. And even though I may feel, quote unquote, stupid about asking this question, I'm going to still ask it. And I got comfortable doing that until the point where I was one of those students who the professor knew was always going to have something to say. So I say all of that to share, as I'm jumping into these scary things, yes, these are scary things, but I'm very strategic. Like, I'm a very intentional individual, and I know that I have strengths. I know I have weaknesses. And in order for me to get to what I want, like, there has to be some at least some level of strategy. I'm not going to overthink and try to perfect it before I take a step, but I'm going to have at least, like, I forgot who said it. There's a book where it says start with the end goal in mind or something like that, right? And so I'm going to at least see what the vision looks like. And as I am stepping on these steps, it's going to get clearer as I get closer. And I've just always been that. I mean, I've been told in undergrad, I initiated a lot of things on my campus. There were a lot of things that didn't exist until Abe said, this is a problem, we're going to make it happen. And I started this program called Mental Health Mondays. And I would have a session in the University Commons area, open to any student, staff, faculty who wanted to attend. And I would just teach, like, anything I was learning in psychology, anything that I was learning through my own research. I would just teach for 45 minutes or so, invite the fraternity, student orgs, my professors, all that. Hey, this is what anxiety is. This is what the signs are. This is the help that you have on campus. And I did that consistently for some time. And I had, like, counselors come to those sessions and then afterwards say to me, hey, you shouldn't be doing this stuff. Like, you don't have any credentials. Like, yeah, you're studying psychology and you have a good heart in what you're doing. But you shouldn't do that. You need to stop. And, like, I heard it was like, you ain't doing it, so who's going to do it? So I'm not counseling people. I'm just providing the education so that they can end up in your office and get the counseling they need. So, there were a lot of people who came to me and said that I wouldn't do what it is I'm doing today. I shouldn't be talking about things like mental health. I say this all the time. Like, I got my bachelor's in psychology. And there are so many people who say, well, you don't have a master's, so I don't think you can X, Y, Z. You don't have a PhD. You haven't done all these reviewed articles and things like that. And I hear it. I mean, they may have validity behind it, but I'm not going back to school. And I'm clear on that. So whatever it takes in order for me to, what adjustments I need to make in order for me to get to where I'm trying to go, like I'm willing to do those necessary things, and it's scary and it's a first many times, so there isn't really a blueprint, at least what I found in some situations. But there's this guy who I love. He always says a statement, there's always a way. And every time like I come up on a challenge and I'm like, okay, this seems impossible, but then I remember there's always a way. I just haven't figured it out yet. So I think doing the hard things comes from my parents and comes from the environment I was in. But then how I continue to nurture that is to realize I don't have all the answers. It's okay to ask for help. And because of my nature, I'm going to always jump out, and figure things out.
Well, I mean, it's incredibly powerful to hear. And it kind of, I've got a bone to pick with, the institutions, right? Some people are always going to be like, hey, you shouldn't be talking about this subject because you're not credentialed. You don't have certification. You don't have the piece of paper hanging on your wall. And my response to that is, if you're not doing it, then who's going to do the work? You know what I'm saying? And it's like we don't build confidence through saying things, but we build confidence through doing things and having a track record of what we've accomplished in the past that gives us the confidence to stand in front of you today. And my question for you is the mindset of having somebody from the institution who is credentialed, who is certified, coming up to Abe and being like, you shouldn't have these conversations. How did you kind of stay steadfast in those early days? Was it the mission that you had in front of you? Was it the passion that you had to kind of spread awareness around what you were kind of, so into? What was that drive, and how'd you kind of, fortify that mindset? Because I know there's a lot of people out there who are really crippled by the conversations, the no's, the you shouldn't be doing this from the people at the top. You know what I'm saying? So like, how did you kind of fortify that mindset?
That's such a great question, because now we're talking about like the internal work necessary to do anything. Not even my specific situation, but what do you have to say to yourself? What do you have to know? What do you have to believe in order to take that step? So I love this question. And in all honesty, bro, like when I heard that, it did shake me a little bit, because I'm like, well, I'm not credentialed. And then I think she tried to use like a scare tactic or whatever. But like she basically said like, hey, what if one of these students who attend your session like ends up dying by suicide? What if they take their lives, right? Like, you can be liable for things like that. And so there were certain things that now had me thinking, oh, shoot, well, what do I do in those situations? And for me, now it was about having a creative approach to what I'm doing, because at the end of the day, like, I'm not going to stop. I just need to find out how to do it. Do I need to bring a professional in these sessions so that they can sit in while I do my teaching? Do I need to get certain credentials, or do I need to not teach certain things but still teach these things? But initially it did kind of shake me a little bit, because now I was exposed to information that I didn't have before, and it's very likely that somebody can take their lives after attending a session. So from that, it was really just thinking through it. Right. That going back to that saying, there's always a way. So another thing was, I believed from the very beginning that this mission I'm on is much bigger than me. I never wanted to do this. Like, I never wanted to open up about my mental health. I was scared. First of all, I couldn't tell my parents because they didn't understand depression. And they were just like, you need to just, get up and do what you got to do. Like, that's just how we operated. And there were people who I was close to that when I did start to speak openly about depression, they were like, nah, hey, you different. Like, we don't do that. Like, it wasn't cool like it is now. Think about 2015. Like, yes, there were some people talking about it, but it wasn't like we saw a lot more, influential figures bringing it up. So I lost friends, like, because I was doing this thing. But I remember making a commitment to God, like one of the days where I was in like this really dark period. I said, yo, God, if you get me through this, I will tell the world about how you got me through this. So, and he got me through it. He continues to. So I really had this internal belief and drive that it's always been bigger than me. It has nothing. I mean, yes, I play a small role in all of this, but it's bigger. Like, this is going to live beyond what I could ever imagine. I think the other piece is having community and support to help nurture you. I say this quote a lot of times with people, and I say sometimes you have to rely on the belief that others have in you until you build the belief in yourself. And there were some people who saw me doing what I was doing, and they believed strongly in what they saw. They're like, I don't know how far Abe is going to go with this, but he's about to blow up. And so I believe in whatever he says, whatever he does. Like, I was having a conversation with one of my mentors, and I was just sharing this idea that I had, and I was like, yo, this is about to change the world. And he was like, the crazy thing is, I believe you. Yeah. I literally believe you because I know who you are. And so I had, people even in my ears at that time, mentors, community, who was saying, hey, you may not have the credentials, but what makes you an expert is your story. Like, you are an expert in your lived experience. And a lot of these therapists, clinicians who are out there, they may not have that lived experience, or they may not be open to tapping into their own personal experience. And so they can only go so far with theory. They can only go so far in supporting someone with what they've learned in the classroom. And so the fact that I come with not only the knowledge, the education, but like, I've been there, like, I'm talking about, like, to the darkest place where I'm considering, do I even continue to live? Like, how can I live if I'm going to continue feeling like this, to now being on the other side of that? So, and then I'm also open to, like, sharing that. So I think having community, knowing your why are you doing this? Knowing the impact, the level of impact that's going to come from you just staying the course. These were all things that were helpful for me to continue moving forward. Even when the institution, was like, nah, you need to stop.
Yeah. I mean, that's very interesting to me. And I love the fact that, you have a mentor who believes in you because of your lived experience. That in itself is such a powerful message. The thing that I think about, and I have this discussion with myself all the time, and I'm sure you have this influence in your life as well. You said at the beginning of our call today that, there's a lot of other things that you're interested in, which I totally understand. Because as an entrepreneur, especially in this world of technology and AI and all this other kind of stuff out there, there's so many opportunities for us to chase money, right? But I come from a very selfish and almost egotistical position when I speak about mental health and why it's so important to me, because I want to be known as that guy in my lineage. You know what I'm saying? I'm 6'6", 235 pounds. I'm a big dude. And it's a different mentality when you can stand up in front of people and talk about gratitude, talk about being vulnerable. You can talk about positivity. You can talk about mental health. You know what I'm saying? And so, like, I come from a very selfish position and being like, I want to be known as that guy in my community, in my friend circle, in the lineage. When everybody looks back, and you and I have this amazing gift because we have the ability to speak in front of others, but we're also now documenting this. So I think about the future lineage, the Gabe the third, or the Abe the third, or the Keenan the fifth. Do you know what I'm saying? Who comes back and looks at the things that me and you were doing in 2023, and then the lives that we were impacting as well. Because the conversations around mental health, in my opinion, are so multiplicative that we only need to have a few conversations that start other people talking, that other people talk about, and then we've seen the transformation in our society right in front of us. So, I come from a more of a selfish position and just wanted to be that guy for the people around me. But I also recognize the mission that you're on. And I think there's a little bit of confidence in that swagger that kind of comes in you as well.
I love it. And, you mentioned that, and it's interesting you see it as selfish. I don't really even see it as selfish because at the end of the day, in order for you to become that guy, it takes other people. I mean, you can't be that guy if you're the only person on the planet, right?
That's
Who
true.
are you going to be that guy to or for, right?
Yeah.
So the simple fact that, the mission is being that guy, there is the understanding that you have that people must be involved in that. So I love that you want to be that guy. Like, I think about LeBron James, right? I'm sure he wanted to be that guy. Like, he is that guy, right? I'm sure he didn't go into the game, saying to himself at an early age, I just want to be good enough, right? But look at the influence, the impact, the that he has now, right? Because he had the mission of, I want to be that guy. So I love that you're on that mission, because we need more people who want to be that difference maker. Because the reality is, I feel like even now to this day, like there has been multiple shifts around the conversation of mental health, wellness, well-being, especially with, among men, African American men. But I still don't think that we've even scratched the surface. Yes, we're talking about it more, but I still don't think it's cool yet. So you being that guy, you have a lot of work to do. Like we have a lot of work to do. And we have to realize that, yes, this is happening right now, but this is only a snippet of what will take place, generations after. Because I think about even what's so crazy is, like, a few years ago, the conversation was COVID-19. That's all you heard. Look at a few years later, we're hearing it here and there, it's coming up and so that just goes to show how quickly the shift can happen, the perception can happen, the conversation can happen. And just like mental health, you think about the cancel culture, whether you partake in it or not. I don't, but look how quickly someone who is at a level of influence can lose their influence in the snap of a finger, right? So I think that what we're seeing now is great, but this ain't nothing. Like, I'm talking about, what does longevity look like? What does it look like to, even look at, racism, right? There's been so many years of progression, but we still experienced, many people still experience racism. So what does longevity look like around the conversation of mental health? And that's the way I believe that those who are in these positions like us should be thinking about, right? We're in a cool spot now, but we got so much more to do, so much more work to do.
Yeah, man. So do you think that, I saw Simon Sinek the other day talking about mental health, and he was like, the conversation around mental health today has become so all-encompassing that everything is mental health. You know what I'm saying? Anxiety, depression, everything. And it's like, it almost becomes like a buzzword. And so one of the things that he talked about, and I love the language switch here, was changing mental health into mental fitness and recognizing that there are correlations between our physical fitness and our mental fitness. One of which is, it is a consistent exercise and partaking in different ways to challenge ourselves that we get into peak physical fitness. And if we want to accomplish a high level of mental health or mental fitness, we also have to do that hard work, having those tough conversations, doing the squats, going consistently, working on yourself consistently, working on that inner work. And I thought that was a very interesting perspective in how we can change the language to create more opportunities of acceptance from men especially. Because I feel like in our narrative, there are so many stigmas that we have around mental health, because it comes with so much preconceived notion, preconceived experience, and I would say definitions that maybe we don't align with. So what is your 2 cents on overcoming some of the challenges from the male perspective about mental health in general and making it not come across so soft? Do we have to change the language? Do we have to position it in different ways? What's your 2 cents?
So I have an interesting perspective on this, because I don't necessarily think it's about changing the language, but I am 100% for doing what the individual needs in order to get to where they need to go. So if it works for you to call it mental fitness instead of mental health, let's rock with it. But I don't necessarily think it's we have to say it's no longer mental health. It's like, call it what it is. Like, because if we get into that, rabbit hole, it will continue to change. Next year, it's not going to be mental fitness. It's going to be mental aerobics, mental balance, right? And so I prescribe to this guy who says, in a world where it's something to the effect of, in a world where things are always changing, you need to hold on to the things that never change. So what that means for me is there are some things that just never change. What are those things as it relates to mental health? Mental health will always be mental health, right? And what I try to do in my work is I try to shift the perspective that we have around mental health versus shifting the language, because we don't say, to your point about squats, we don't call squats sit downers, because when we think of squats, it makes us think like, I don't want to do that. We call them squats because it's a squat, right? But in all of that being said, like, I am going, if helping you to take care of your mental health requires that we shift the language, then let's shift the language. Like, let's do what we got to do. And for me, specifically, when you talk about like, how do we go about shifting the stigma and really reducing that stigma? I think it's two things that will help with that, is educating ourselves and others and sharing our stories. I was in the airport the other day and something hit me and I was like, man, that was good. Do I have my notebook? I may not say it, exactly how I wrote it down, but essentially it was, be intelligent enough to ask the question and be curious enough to listen to responses. Mm-hmm. And that has everything to do with understanding that as human beings, we have stories, we have lived experiences. And I will never understand your story until I ask you certain questions and actually listen to what you have to say. So for me, the way I'm going to work towards eradicating stigma off of this planet is, number one, I'm going to continue to educate myself and educate others. And then I'm going to continue to share my story and the stories of others. And I think in doing that over time, we will just adapt or evolve into this culture where it's a normal part of life. Like the same way we talk about, hey, like, what you drinking? Oh, I'm drinking water. Okay, make sure you keep your water intake up. We're also going to have conversations where it's like, hey, when's the last time you saw your therapist? I just checked in with them last week because I was going through a few things. And I can already see that happening in the African American community. Now it's just about taking those steps to make that a reality. But there are so many other creative approaches and ways that we can go about doing it. But just in really like researching and being curious, those are the two ways that I'm really focusing on shifting, our perspective.
Yeah, it's amazing what can happen if you never quit. You know what I'm saying? Young Thug has a quote that I thought was really amazing, beyond his situation right now. But he was like, if you want to stop restarting, then you got to stop quitting. And I was like, okay, that's very interesting. And it's very true. I mean, I was having a conversation yesterday with a spiritual and emotional counselor at a high school here in Las Vegas. And we were talking about the work that we do at Francis. And she was like, one of the biggest shifts that I see, even from our generation, and she was in her mid-20s, she was like, my students are willing to have the conversation more today. And I was like, that is amazing to hear. She was like, I never thought I would have seen it, but we have students who will come up to us and start asking questions. They want to have these tough conversations because they want to know what's going on. And my perspective is, we have to keep doing the work that you and I are doing, Abe, because every single opportunity, every piece of content, every conversation we have that we put out into the world is an opportunity to start an internal or an external conversation about these things that are so important. And it's just so amazing to kind of see how these younger generations are pushing forward, like we've talked about, the responsibility of everything that our parents have dealt with and didn't have the skill set, the tools, the mechanisms to be able to have the conversations. And now we have a generation of people who are coming up and are willing to be more vulnerable, which I think is so powerful.
It is.
One of the things I want to ask you about is kind of your perspective of vulnerability as we wrap up here today. So on social media today, we almost have an idealistic kind of culture that overplays vulnerability for likes, shares, comments, engagement, that kind of stuff. Have you recognized this in society where people are almost willing to overshare just as an ability to get the reaction from the people who are in their following circle?
Yeah, I've seen bits and pieces of that, but I also understand that when someone does not have a safe space, they tend to use social media as a safe space. Unfortunately, that's the case. And so the fact that they are even expressing versus suppressing all of that, I think is a good thing in some cases. But then there are also obviously those people who are doing it for the likes, for the, attention and all of that stuff. But yeah, I've seen it, and I try to give it the benefit of the doubt. Right. And really, like, especially if it's somebody that is close to me or somebody that I know, like reading between the lines, like I see what you're saying. Is there something that you are trying to communicate, which is why you did what you did or shared what you just shared? Or is it that you're just sharing because it's something that's going on culturally, or you're trying to get likes and all that stuff. But you talk about vulnerability and how often we're hearing it, and how it can look like so many different things for many different people. And I think that's very interesting because that's also true. But when I think about vulnerability, I think about nakedness. What does it feel like when you are butt naked in front of someone? Like, and sorry to get graphic for our listeners, but there is that feeling of, oh my gosh, I'm seen right now. Like everything is exposed right now. So when I think of vulnerability, when I find myself in that place, I know that I am being vulnerable, and I'm also doing the hard thing that's going to allow me to grow as a human being. And that doesn't happen often. Like, there are some people who are posting things on social media and all this stuff, and for the ones who are doing it for the likes, they don't feel the feeling of, oh, I'm naked, or people are seeing me. They are looking for something. But there are some people who are posting and stuff, and then they're like hesitant, should I hit the send button, or should I actually post this, because these are my inner thoughts, these are my inner emotions. And I think I don't know, I haven't thought too much about this question, but it's a good question. I think that is how you know you're being vulnerable. That is how you know that you are growing. And that shouldn't happen with any and everybody. I think there are people that you need to identify in your life that you can be vulnerable with. And I'm not vulnerable like naked in front of just everybody. And as much as I'm open to sharing my story and talking about mental health, there are certain things that I just won't tell you, because that ain't your business. But you talk to my wife, you talk to my closest friends, and they will, they will know some things that you will not know. And that's because we have built that relationship over time to where we have that safe space to be vulnerable. And I share this, in presentations or just in conversation, a principle that I live by. And I call it the HOT principle. And this kind of speaks to the whole vulnerability thing and how you can go about practicing vulnerability. So the HOT acronym came from the purification process that gold goes through in order to become that, valuable commodity and that beautiful bar of gold or whatever. So it goes through extreme heat and extreme pressure, and it's hot, it's uncomfortable. So I believe that as human beings, we also go through extreme pressure and extreme heat, and it's hot. So in the HOT principle, it stands for H, being honest, O, being open, and T, being transparent. So when we're honest, it's when we are tapping into self-awareness. What's going on with me internally? We're not sharing any information yet. We're just checking in with self. Being open is when we're open to new information. We're going to, try something different. Albert Einstein says insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, yet expecting different results, right? You have to at least be open. And then the transparency piece is, now that I've done the self-awareness work, I'm now open to suggestion, open to information, open to trying something different. I am going to be transparent within my inner circle, right? And in that transparency, that's when I'm able to really get what it is that I need. And I think it takes work, right? Like when I have conversations with my friends and I'm like, yo, I got to be hot right now. Like, and they know, okay, Abe needs to be honest, open, and transparent. Like, me just asking for that space is difficult because I don't come from a background where we just, share our stuff. It's like, what happens in this house stays in this house. Like, we don't talk about that stuff. So it takes effort, energy. And if, I'm able to do that consistently, I think it allows me to grow as a human.
Well, I think that is a perfect place for us to end today, Abe. You know, I can see the trajectory that you're on, the impact that you're having in your community, the lives that you're impacting, but more importantly, the motivation behind why you're doing what you're doing. And I'm pretty sure that the audience was able to pick up on that as well because of how passionate you are and the conviction that you have when you speak about these important topics. And I just want to say thank you so much for everything that you're doing, man. And it's been a pleasure having you on the show today. Thanks, man.
Absolutely, my guy. I loved it. This was great.
All right, cool.